Hello, I'm Juan Carlos Gamarra, the Ambassador of Peru to the United Kingdom, and continuing with our cycle of Bicentennial Dialogues, in which we will talk about important and crucial events from our independence with top-level specialists, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Catherine Davies, who will talk to us about the participation of women in the process of our independence. Catherine Davies is a professor of Hispanic and Latin American Studies at the Institute of Modern Languages Research, School of Advanced Studies at the University of London. She has several researches and publications on gender studies, history, Spanish language and literature, literatures in the modern language, modern history, regional history, and Romanticism. Also, she has special interests and expertise on the 19th and 20th century Spanish-American history, culture, and literature, and on the wars of independence in Spanish America. We're very grateful today to have Professor Davies in this podcast, and I invite you to begin, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's a great pleasure for me to speak about this precisely at the Peruvian Embassy. So it's delightful. Thank you. So the contribution of women to the political independence of Peru was crucial. And frankly, I don't think independence would have been achieved without them, at least not in the short term. After all, women made up about 50% of the overall population, so it's not surprising. Women of all classes and ethnicities played their part. They provided the infrastructure for military operations, medical, intendancy, propaganda, espionage. They were effective political operators. They helped finance the wars. And as mothers, they provided the troops and kitted them out. They gave wise advice and moral support, and they often accompanied the men to the battle lines to take care of their needs. On the home front, many women took over men's roles as heads of households, property holders, and managers of estates. And some were military leaders and commanded militia. In Peru, we have the example of Francisca Zubiaga de Gamarra, La Mariscala, born in Cusco, who led and commanded troops in Upper Peru in 1828 and governed with her husband, Agustin Gamarra, president of Peru between 1829 and 1833. Her activities, however, fall outside the independence period, properly speaking. After independence, women were largely forgotten. They were erased from history or misrepresented after their death, and this was in order to normalize the gender order and gender hierarchy, which had been challenged by the need for women's support during the struggle. With some important exceptions, women's history was not taken seriously until the 20th century. Their contribution was not seen as valuable or interesting. Having said that, the centenary of independence from 1910 to 1920 did produce important studies. One example is Elvira García y García's book, La Mujer Peruana a través de los siglos, published in Lima in 1924, which gives the biographical details of 180 women involved in the independent movement in Peru. It was not until the 21st century, though, and the bicentenaries of 2010 until now, that women's history has flourished. In this respect, I'd like to flag up the seminal contribution of Peruvian Sara Beatriz Guardia and the Centro de Estudios de la Mujer en la Historia de América Latina, or CEMHAL, based in Lima. It's published a wealth of material on the subject of women in the independence period, but there are still many gaps, not least because, for obvious reasons, the majority of the studies have focused on the women patriotas and not the royalist women, las realistas, the women who lost. So as we don't have much time, I'll focus on one historical document that gives a good indication of the way women contributed to independence in Peru. The document is La Gaceta del Gobierno de Lima Independiente, which in 1822 published a list of 200 women who were awarded the famous Order of the Sun, La Orden del Sol. The distinction created by decree by San Martin and modelled on the French Legion of Honor was a band of silk and a gold or a silver medal with the state arms engraved on the back. It was awarded to recognize the contribution of any person to the struggle for independence irrespective of gender. El gobierno desea distinguir el mérito de toda persona cuyo corazón ha suspirado sinceramente por la patria. Those admitted to the order received a pension and had to swear to dedicate their lives and wealth to defend the liberty of Peru. In the first tranche, the names of 256 men were put forward and also 112 women, which is a good percentage, almost half. In a few months, the number of women on the list had grown almost to 200. San Martin was fully aware of the power of women's influence and had appealed to women in July 1821 to join the war effort. He realized that the ties between the Creole elite and Spain were still strong, and he'd set up camp on the outskirts of Lima for a year with the intention of persuading the loyalists to join the cause. On the list of awardees are the names of women such as Antonia Armas, Asunción Cervera, and Buquaventura Mundaca, who had sewn shirts for the Liberation Army soldiers. Antonia Zumaeta de Riquero and her cousin Juana de Dios Manrique de Luna, who had communicated the movements of royalist troops to the patriot families in Callao and Lima. Andrea Mendoza de Sancho Dávila, la Marquesa de Casa Dávila, the first woman of the aristocratic elite to welcome San Martin to a reception at her home after his triumphant entrance into Lima in 1821. Camila Arnau, who wrote a letter to San Martin, signed The Women Patriots, or Las Patriotas, which stated that if the men were tired of fighting, the women would take their place. The letter was intercepted and Camila Arnau was imprisoned. Another who received the award was Carmen Manrique de Lara de Zárate, Marquesa de Montemira, the wife of the last mayor of Lima, who had signed the Act of Independence and handed over the keys of Lima to San Martin. La Marquesa persuaded the governing elite to join the independence movement and donated her wealth and jewels to fund it. Also on the list were the much celebrated Rosa Campuzano, born in Guayaquil and said to be San Martin's lover, and the no less celebrated Manuela Sainz, born in Quito. Together they circulated propaganda and took part in pro-independence gatherings. Campuzano hosted salons for the patriots at the same time as hosting salons attended by the Viceroy de la Serna. She also persuaded royalist soldiers to switch sides, such as Tomás de Eres of the famous Numancia battalion, and the elderly Maria Hermenegilda de Gisla, who with the help of her niece Maria Simona de Gisla y Vergara, persuaded young revolutionaries to meet in her home and used her age to allay suspicions. She would meet with the Spanish during the day and pass on the news to the insurgents by night. These are just a few of the many examples of women who progressed the independence cause. We could also mention Rosa Merino, the soprano, who on the evening of the 24th of September 1821 in the Teatro Principal sang for the very first time the national anthem. But this was dangerous undercover work. Many women were severely punished and imprisoned. Many took refuge in convents. The indigenous woman Maria Andrea Parado de Bellido was executed near Ayacucho for passing on information in correspondence, though she herself was illiterate. By including women in the first publicly awarded distinctions, the military and civic authorities recognized women's contribution. San Martin was keen to emphasize that women were natural patriots because, unlike men who tended towards violence, women's traditional feminine attributes such as tenderness and family love made for stability and order. Women were therefore recognized as useful for social well-being, and their so-called feminine attributes were valuable for national reconstruction. In this respect, independence provided the conditions which allowed women to enter the political and public space, albeit temporarily, a space until then reserved for men. The process of inclusion was slow, but it gathered space in the 19th century, particularly with the next generation of very feisty Peruvian women, such as Mercedes Cabello de Carbonera and Clorinda Mato de Turner.